Hey guys, Will here. So Moza Racing have literally just released their brand new Vision GS wheel. Now this is a bit of a mixed bag. There's some things that I absolutely love about the wheel, some things that I think are a little bit of a miss as well. So we'll be unpacking it in all its detail in today's video to figure out whether or not this might be the next wheel for your sim rig. Let's check it out. So as always, before we dive into the wheel today, firstly, a couple of important housekeeping things. So firstly, big thank you to Moza Racing for sending across the Vision GS wheel for us to check out. Now we will be cross-comparing this wheel against some of the other wheels available within the Moza Racing ecosystem, as well as the wider market too. So it's important that you're aware that all the wheels that we're looking at in today's video were all provided to us under the exact same conditions. And if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see in today's video, whether it's Moza Racing or anything else, we do have some affiliate links and discount codes available down in the description box down below, or just hit up boostedmedia.net to access those. That's an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media without it costing you an extra cent. And we do very much appreciate your support there. That's literally what keeps us running. But without further ado, let's dive in now, talk about a little bit of pricing information. This is definitely on the more expensive side when it comes to Moza Racing ecosystem. So let's dive in. So this is, at least at the time that we're making this video, the most expensive wheel available within the Moza Racing ecosystem. The build quality is a step above even the FSR wheel, and we'll take a look at the comparison between the two in just a moment. But to start off with the pricing here, you are looking at $749 for this wheel, 829 euro, 749 Great British pounds, or 1,299 Australian dollars. So obviously we're making this video before the product has launched, so the pricing is obviously subject to change. What I would recommend you do is just shop around, make sure you're getting the best possible price. Shipping, import duties, taxes, whatnot can all change depending on where you are in the world. Also worth just checking to see if we do have a discount code available for a reseller local to you down in that description box as well, to potentially save yourself a little bit of money. So most expensive wheel that we've seen from Moza Racing to date, but as I said, definitely a step up in terms of build quality. So before we charge ahead here and cover comparison pricing, let's just quickly cover off the materials that they're using for the build of this, so it gives you a better baseline for comparison here. So they are using a microfiber leather material, and it is hand stitched for the wrapping around the outside. We'll unpack all of this in more detail as we get through the video, but just to cover it off at a top level for you, they're using a carbon fiber composite material for the faceplate here. So same kind of material as you see on the SimMagic GT Neo, for example. Not quite the same as forged carbon fiber like what you'll see on the shifter paddles, but it does still have that forged carbon fiber look to it. Just doesn't quite have the same depth to it that genuine forged carbon fiber has. But it is lightweight at 1.55 kilograms by my measurement. That is including the quick release on the wheel side as well, and very, very rigid as well. Absolutely no issues with flex here whatsoever. In fact, I would go as far as to say this is one of the more rigid wheels that we've ever tested here out of everything at Boosted Media. So very, very impressed with the rigidity overall. Now, part of the reason for that is that they have used an aluminium frame as well as aluminium backplate for the wheel too. So there's no plastic other than just that composite carbon fiber material on the face. Pretty much everything here other than just the backlit push buttons is all metal, and a very nice high quality look and feel overall. So let me just set this guy to the side for a moment. And now that you have a good baseline for comparison in terms of build materials, let's bring across the FSR wheel. So the FSR wheel is $100 cheaper than this. Now, we do have full reviews of all the wheels that we're comparing to directly in today's video. So I'll link some of those down in the description box below for you. And again, just check out boostedmedia.net for all the details and the full breakdowns of all of these various different wheels. But this guy is another good alternative within the Moza Racing ecosystem if you do want something that has a dash. Now, the perception of overall quality when you use both of these wheels back to back is somewhat similar. This wheel does just feel a little bit more plasticky. It's mostly just the plastic grips, I think, that contribute to that. The buttons subjectively, I don't think have quite as nice a feel as they do on the newer wheel either. And there are some features that we have on this wheel that you'll see later on, which we don't have on the FSR wheel. But I will say that ergonomically, I do actually prefer the feel of this wheel for racing. We'll get into some of the reasons why a little bit later on. So just within the ecosystem as well, if you're wanting something a little bit cheaper without the screen, of course, remembering that Moza Racing do have a selection of dashboards available that you can bolt directly onto your wheelbase. We've got the GS wheel. Now, this is a V1 wheel. There is also a V2 wheel available now, which unfortunately I don't have here for comparison, but the GS wheel comes in at $449, so quite a bit cheaper. Overall, the look and feel is very similar to the FSR wheel, same quality buttons and all that, basically just getting rid of the screen. And then if you want to spend less money again, you can step down to something like the KS wheel, which we reviewed a little while back, and that guy comes in at $279. And while it does have quite similar feeling buttons to what we have on this guy, obviously not quite the same feature set, a lower quality build overall, and yeah, just not really in the same ballpark, particularly just around things like the shift shifters not being as rigid. But again, you guys can check out the full review of that wheel if you're looking at that. But I mean, obviously we're not really even in the same kind of ballpark here in terms of price once we get down to something like the KS wheel. But I just wanted to show you those guys side by side so you get a better picture of what's going on over here. And you can see how this wheel is a bit of a step aside from the design philosophy that we've seen previously from Moza Racing. Now there are of course some cheaper options out there if you do want a wheel with an integrated screen. One of the ones that comes to mind that we've looked at is the Leox XF1, which we were quite impressed with. You can check out the full review of that. And then out of the wheels that we've looked at here at Boosted Media, pretty much it's all just upwards from here. So you've got things like the Cube Control CSX3, which is an overall step up in quality. And although this does have a genuine carbon fiber faceplate as opposed to the composite material you see on the Moza wheel, other than the shifters, it's really actually quite similar in the overall build quality between the two. And then really it just goes up from there. I could spend all day going through various different options, but I'm sure the wheel that came to mind as soon as you guys saw this was probably the Fanatec Bentley GT3 wheel, which was announced many years ago now, in fact, but at least to this day has not been released. Now, I do have one here. Unfortunately, I can't tell you a whole lot about it simply because we are still waiting for finalized software before we can even drive with the thing. So all I've done is just take it out of the box and have a look at it. I don't have any pricing information or anything like that. So obviously, as soon as we are able to review this guy, we will do so. But I wanted to give you a look at these two side by side so you can see where the similarities are. But there are actually quite a few variations here as well. One thing I will say is that I don't expect this wheel to be anywhere near the same ballpark price-wise as what we have with the Moza wheel. So I don't really think that it's going to come down to a choice between the two. I expect, and this is just purely my own opinion, this isn't based on any sort of insider information at all, but I expect that this wheel will probably be even more expensive than the M4 GT3 wheel. So we wanted to give you a quick look at that. I'll probably get in trouble for it, but there you go. That is what the two wheels look like side by side. But back to the Vision GS wheel now. And look, I think that overall it is fairly priced for what it is. I would say that when compared to some of the third-party wheels available in the open market, this definitely does punch a little bit above its weight, I would say. Now, compatibility-wise, I'm very happy to say that this wheel will work with full functionality, whether you have a Moza wheelbase or any other brand wheelbase as well. You will just need to have the Moza Racing hub adapter and USB adapter, which we've covered previously. I'll link the review video down below for you in the description box. It is only PC compatible though, so just be aware of that. So materials aside, what exactly are you getting for the money? So this is a 310mm diameter wheel, a little bit on the larger side for a wheel of this style. In my subjective opinion, I prefer, if you've seen any of my recent videos, you already know what I'm going to say here, somewhere between about 280 and 300mm tends to be the sweet spot for me. This does feel a little bit awkward to drive with for formula style cars. You will adjust to it and adapt to it for your sort of GT3, GT4 style cars though, and be absolutely fine. So I don't think it's a deal breaker by any means. If I had my pick, I would have made it 300mm, but it is what it is. One thing that I do like though is that the grips are relatively narrow, so it doesn't have a big bulbous and chunky feel in your hands like some larger diameter wheels tend to do. So it is at least very comfortable to hold in your hands, although there are a few ergonomic challenges here, which we will get into in just a moment. But look, otherwise, obviously, the big thing that you guys are going to be interested in is the dash here. So this is a 2.85-inch dash, and it is a touch screen as well. So let's just quickly run you through some of the cool things that you can do with this dash. And we'll get into the software side of things a little bit later on, because you can actually fully customize this for the first time on a Moza Racing wheel. And one of the really cool things I think about this whole setup is that it's not relying on any third-party software like SimHub to do so. So you can do this completely within their own ecosystem. And that obviously means that if something were to happen with third-party software, you are still going to be able to operate this wheel, which isn't necessarily the case with other brands. And one of the things that I highlighted in our Asher Racing McLaren Artura wheel review just a couple of weeks ago was the fact that was relying so heavily on third-party software to basically provide its core functionality. That is not the case with this wheel, and I think that's something that is really important to call out. One of the really strong positives with what they've done here. That obviously does come with some limitations in terms of functionality too, but we'll show you that when we get into the software in just a minute. So, as you guys have already probably spotted in the driving footage, it does rotate with the wheel as you turn it gyroscopically. Now, I was a little bit concerned that it might only work this way when connected to a Moza Racing wheelbase, but as you can see here, we do have the wheel freestanding and it is able to operate. Now, there is a little bit of lag there. It probably looks a little bit striking to you on camera. What I can tell you is that when you're driving, it doesn't tend to annoy me as much as I thought it would. And I am a OCD person, so I expected that would trigger me really hard. But what I found is generally in opportunities where you're going to be looking at the screen, you're either on a straight anyway, or you're kind of mid-corner where the wheel's in a relatively static position. So it does make the display genuinely a little bit easier to read at a quick glance if you're just taking your eyes off the road for a split second to read it. So I definitely do like that functionality. You can switch it off if you wish to do so as well, and it will just rotate with the wheel rather than staying in a static position. So look, I'm hoping that they can speed it up a little bit more. I mean, you guys can see there the lag and the slight choppiness for yourselves. You don't really need me to make excuses for it. If you do end up buying one of these wheels, definitely do come back and let us know in the comments down below whether it's something that bothers you. But personally, it didn't end up bothering me as much as I expected it to. Now, in terms of touchscreen functionality, you can swipe in either direction to switch between pages. And then you can also scroll up and down to switch between dashboards. And that covers off most of the kind of cars you're likely to be driving with a wheel of this style. So everything from more kind of street car style dashes, all the way through to things that are more conducive to your more Formula style cars, as you can see in this driving footage now. So yeah, a good implementation there. The touchscreen itself is very responsive. I did find that it was a little bit awkward sometimes to operate with gloves on. I do have little conductive pads on the fingerprint of my gloves, and even still, I did find a few times I'd swipe and it didn't quite respond. I'd have to go in and do it a second time. But look, realistically, it's not something that you're going to be playing with constantly anyway. You might, while the novelty factor's there, but once that wears off, you're probably going to ultimately end up setting and forgetting on one particular dash, or maybe just swiping between pages occasionally. But as I mentioned earlier, you can custom design your own dashes for this as well, which is really cool, and we'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. But otherwise, resolution, brightness, and viewing angles are all absolutely fine here. I don't actually know exactly what the resolution of the screen is, but reading small text is absolutely no issues at all, and it certainly doesn't look pixelated at all, so I don't think anybody's going to have an issue there. And yeah, I think overall I was kind of expecting it to be a little bit more gimmicky than it actually is in practice, so I think they've done a good job. But let's move on now into some of the other inputs, and then we'll take a deeper dive into the software side of things. So other than the really funky dash, what else do we have on the wheel? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 push buttons. Those are RGB backlit, and you can adjust the color of those and the brightness, of course, through the software. Those have a pretty nice snappy feel to them, very similar to what we get on Cube controls rooms, for example, as well as the KS wheel. That, as you saw before, has a very similar button style, and in fact, I think they may actually be exactly the same buttons. We're quite happy with those for the price on the KS wheel. On a more expensive wheel like this, look, honestly, they don't feel out of place. I think they're absolutely fine. They are just quite snappy. They don't really have any squish to them before they activate, but yeah, no real complaints there with regards to the push buttons, and plenty of brightness there as well. Now, just like what we have on the KS wheel, one of the key differences between this wheel and a lot of Moza's other wheels, including the FSR wheel, is that these buttons were pre-labeled. So you were kind of stuck with whatever labeling they decided you were going to have on the wheel. With this wheel, they do include a nice high quality sticker sheet, as well as a set of tweezers to install the stickers. And there is little indentations on the buttons to help you line up those stickers perfectly. One thing I did notice when driving was that the buttons do have a tendency to rotate. They aren't in a completely fixed position, so that does mean that some of the stickers might end up looking like they're a little bit off center as you drive. You can just sort of rotate the switch and it will come good again. That does, of course, aid a little bit with sticker installation too, because if you do get your sticker a little bit crooked, you can just rotate the switch and it ends up being perfect. Now, one thing to be aware of with regards to the backlighting here, it isn't able to respond to telemetry and data like what we see on some other third-party wheels these days. It is just selectable from a color wheel, and then it stays in that color until you change it to something else. So there's not really any smarts involved in having these. You can't make them operate as a spotter and funky things like that. Just be aware of that. It is a limitation compared to a lot of other third-party wheels these days. So that is the push buttons. We have 2 thumb encoders here as well. Those are anodized aluminium touch points, so they have a nice feeling to them, and they do have nice snappy detents in each position. A little bit fiddly to operate with gloves on, I did find, simply because they sit almost flush with the composite material beside them. So I did find that my fingers sometimes just sort of slid over the top of them rather than operating them. But again, I think that's something that you'll probably get used to over time and not have too much drama with. Again, it's just one of the small things that I prefer ergonomically about the FSR wheel. It's got the larger indentations there that just make it a little bit easier to operate, although otherwise the thumb encoders do feel very, very similar. So that is the thumb encoders there. We then have 2 little switches on the top here as well. Now, one of the really interesting things about this is a bit of a step away from what we've seen on Moza wheels previously. One of the things that I've always thought was a little bit strange is that they have 2 of these kind of analog switches on them, but they operate as digital switches inside the game. So they're not an analog axis that you can move around. And I've always kind of wondered about that. What they've done with this wheel is maybe even a little bit stranger again. They've got a 7-way funky switch, just like what you'd find on a Fanatec wheel, for example. So that gives you up, down, left, right, rotary encoder, and push button functionality. But on the left-hand side, we don't have the same functionality. So this is the same kind of analog style switch that we see on all the other Moza wheels, but it isn't a mappable analog axis, which is very strange given the style of the button, but it's something that we've seen across all Moza rims to date, and I'm really not sure of the reason why, so I'm not going to speculate, but that is what we have here. Those are, once again, aluminium anodized touch points, and the rotary encoder on the funky switch does have nice, clearly defined clicks in each position. We then move down to our rotary encoder slash multi-position switches. These are, once again, aluminium anodized hats. So a really nice high quality feel to them. They don't appear to be CNC machined like what we see on these guys. They're just a few little clues here that these are cast because they do have quite soft edges on them, but quality is absolutely fine, nothing to complain about. So these can operate as rotary encoder, so just a pulse in either direction, or multi-position switches which register their position, so you can have that correlate with a specific position inside the game. So say, for example, you want to switch to map number 3 or engine map number 3 inside your sim, you go 1, 2, 3, and position number 3 on the wheel will always correlate with that position inside the game, provided that the game that you're playing supports multi-position switches. So it's always a good thing that they have both options available on these wheels. If they only have multi-position switches, that sometimes does limit compatibility with some older sim titles. So again, a good decision there. Again, these have a really nice snappy feel to them. There's not an excessive amount of play. There is a little bit of movement there. Probably looks worse on camera than honestly it is. When you're driving, you don't really notice that at all, particularly with gloves on. But yeah, nice snappy clicks in each position. You're not going to be rotating it by accident, but it's not too stiff either. So I think those are pretty good for the price point. Not really anything to complain about there. And then lastly, on the face of the wheel, we also have this RPM LED strip. So 10 RGB LEDs here. You can tweak these to be any color that you want. You can choose between a couple of different patterns as well for how they illuminate relative to the RPM. You can, of course, adjust the thresholds for each RPM and whether you want it to flash as well. Now, we did have a few issues with this in some titles. So iRacing in particular, we found that it was just kind of flashing like this all the time. Not sure exactly what the reason for that was, but we are still running beta software here. So hopefully that's something that gets addressed in the final release and is fixed by the time you guys get your hands on it. But yeah, just with iRacing in particular, this was a little bit flaky in our experience, but otherwise works absolutely fine and is nice and bright as well. You will notice the shift light flashing in your peripheral vision rather than having to sort of consciously look at the wheel, which kind of defeats the purpose of a shift light. Now, while as mentioned earlier, we don't have the option for a visual spotter on this particular wheel, there is a bunch of telemetry-based things that you can do with the RPM LED strip. These are just toggle switches that you can flick on or off depending on what you want to have flash at you. And this can be used as an indicator light for things that are going on with the car, like traction control or ABS kicking in, or things like DRS or the pit limiter being enabled. You can also have it respond to track status, so red, yellow, green, blue, and white flags as well. So that is the RPM strip, and that's pretty much everything I think we need to cover on the face of the wheel, at least for now, before we get into the overall ergonomics and driving experience. Let's flip the wheel around now, take a look at the quick release, the shifters, and the analog paddles. So starting off with the good things here, we do have the standard Moza quick release here, the NRG style quick release that we find across all of their wheels, and we've always been really impressed with this. You guys have heard me say many times that this and the other brands that use this style quick release are among the best within the OEM space, at least in sim racing. Always been very reliable for me, very easy to operate, and as you can see, we do have pins in the back which transmit our data. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you can use this wheel either with Moza Racing wheelbases directly, operating via the pins on the back here. You also have the RJ connection down here, which is what you'll use if you want to use this wheel with other third-party wheelbases. As you saw before, the gyro for the dash does still work even if you don't have the wheel connected to a Moza wheelbase, so that is really cool. You will just need to have the Moza Racing hub, which allows you to connect your Moza Racing peripherals without a wheelbase directly to your PC, and there's a dedicated video going through all the details of that linked down in the description box below. So nice high quality metal quick release here, aluminium frame as we mentioned earlier, and back shell on the wheel as well. Now you may also notice there are a couple of little push buttons on the back of the wheel too. Now you can use these for ERS and DRS deployment, and they actually do sit in a really good position here. So at least for my hands, I can hold the wheel like that and they're in a very convenient position. A lot of wheels you see, they're kind of up in the top position here, and the way they've designed these, they are sort of sitting flush with the plastic shrouds around them, which mean that they require just the right amount of pressure and intention, I guess you could say, to activate the switches. They're not something that you're going to knock by accident, but they're not difficult to press either, which means you're not going to be leaving time on the table if you're using it for ERS or DRS deployment, anything like that. So I think that's a really good touch. And although they might look like a little bit of an afterthought, ergonomically, they actually do work really well. And even if you're wanting to press those buttons and shift at the same time, you can see, at least with my hand size, I can actually operate both of those at the same time and my fingers don't get trapped or in the way at all. So that is a good segue into talking about the shifters. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't say that at this price point, I was hoping that we might see a bit of a step up in quality on the shifters. They are the exact same shifters that we find on the FSR and the GS wheel. They are better than what we find on the KS wheel though, as you saw a little bit earlier on in the video. So they are aluminium construction here. You can see they do have little nylon or Teflon sleeves to provide nice smooth operation, at least in regards to the shifter paddles. They are quite noisy and we didn't have inside the box the little rubber pads that can quiet those down, although they may include that in final retail because it is something that we have seen included in previous Moza wheels. So a nice snappy feel, but it does have a little bit of a hollow vibration to it. You can hear there's a little bit of a rattle there. And look, they just don't quite have the same high quality feel as you get on something like the CSX3 from Cube Controls, for example. These are definitely a big step up again, both in terms of adjustability and overall quality, although of course this wheel is quite a bit more expensive than the Moza wheel is. Look, I think that if the GS wheel had a lower quality shifter than what's here, I'd probably be feeling a little bit different about it, but given how much more expensive this is than the GS, I was just kind of hoping that it would be a bit of a step up. More so with regards to the analog paddles. These do have a relatively short travel to them, and you can hear the spring does tend to make a little bit of a noise too. I'll let you listen to that. So it just has a little bit of a cheap feeling, I would say, for the price point of this wheel. I am nitpicking here, but you know, these are the kinds of things that you're going to want to know if you're spending this kind of money. So yeah, relatively short throw, and they don't have a particularly progressive feel to them either. So you don't get a lot of sensation as to where you actually are in the throw, which can make it a little bit difficult to operate with precision. Now, as we've come to expect from Moza wheels, you can map these as buttons, as individually mappable axes, or as a bite point clutch. So those are all good things, but they're certainly nowhere near the best feeling analog paddles that we've felt on the market. But I would say the analog paddles, in addition to just the overall slight awkwardness in ergonomics here, are probably the two biggest downsides to this rim, in my opinion. So what I want to do now is give you an overview of some of the things you can do in the software with this particular wheel, simply because we do have a lot more functionality here than what we've seen on previous Moza wheels. And hopefully we see some of this functionality filter across to some of their other products into the future as well. So you guys have already seen the key settings that relate to actually using the wheel. Let's focus purely on the dash here. So we're going to click on steering wheel. We're going to click on dashboard settings. And you can see here, this is totally different to what you've seen on Moza wheels in the past. So the dashes that we see on the left-hand side here are the dashes that are actually loaded onto the wheel itself. The dashes that are in the instrument list over here are dashes that are available but not actually loaded on. So when we swipe through the dashes through the display here, this is just going to go through the ones that are actually loaded on the left-hand side of the screen, just there. So we'll go through to this guy to begin with here. So you can see here a brightness adjustment for the LCD, also our dashboard gravity sensing. So if we want the dash to stay in a fixed position like it is now, we can switch that off. If we want it to rotate with the wheel, we can switch that setting on. And then we have the ability to import other people's profiles too. So if one of your mates has made a really cool dash, or you find something really cool within the Moza community on Discord, for example, you'll be able to share those dashes as well. Now we can go in completely blank and create an entirely new dash. And the way we do that is we click on new. And that's going to create a completely blank slate here. Let's just type in VGS, confirm. And look, basically this operates pretty much like using PowerPoint, if you've ever used PowerPoint. So on the left-hand side here, we have the various different elements that are part of our dash. And then on the right-hand side, we have all of the configurations pertaining to that particular element. So say, for example, we wanted to have a big letter N for neutral. We could drag that into the middle. We could size that to be however we want. So say we want to go font size, say 100, for example. And then we want to change the text itself to be N as a starting point. And then we might want to align it so that it's align center and align center. So it sits right in the middle of our dash. And then what we would want to do is we actually want to assign a telemetry value to this data. So the way we do that is we click on this little symbol here next to text, and then we can click on telemetry. And then we can scroll down through the list of available parameters here, and you can see there's a massive list here. What we would want to find is the current gear. So I'm guessing And there are still some Chinese symbols here in the text. I'm assuming that they will update these to be English. So we want to scroll down through here and find our gear. So it definitely would be good to have the ability to filter this or even search, I think. So definitely a few little things to improve here, purely just because of the sheer number of parameters that are available to us here. So you get the idea. We would just select our gear, and then we could do the same thing for speed or whatever other parameters we want within the dash. You can also import images, create shapes, pretty much anything you can imagine here, and we can layer these as well. So say we've got an image rather than just a circle, we could send that to the back, and then any other text or anything will sit in front of that. Just to give you an idea of how powerful this is, and obviously we're not going to cover absolutely everything here, but if we go in and edit one of the existing dashes, so we click on the little edit key here, you can see all the various different elements down the left-hand side here that make up this particular dash. And if we were to look at something like this guy here, which has a needle, you can see this RPM needle itself is actually comprised of various different elements, and all of the effects and values, all of the configuration options basically for that element are all listed down the right-hand side. So pretty powerful piece of software. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's anywhere near as powerful as something like SimHub, for example, but I definitely think it's a really great thing that this is all in-house. This is all Moza software, not relying on any sort of third party to get the job done. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what creative things people can come up with within this software. So what is the driving experience like with the Vision GS wheel? Now look, I think that it's going to be a little bit polarizing is probably the best way that I can describe this. It is a bit of a quirky wheel, and look, ergonomically I did find the wheel a little bit awkward to drive with, particularly the buttons on the sides here. What I find is most wheels you can kind of just push a thumb button around where the extension of your thumb naturally kind of sits. So if we grab the KS wheel, for example, you can see exactly what I mean here. All of those buttons are relatively easily reachable, including the thumb encoder as well. And I don't really have to adjust my hand position too much to reach any of those buttons. Likewise with the FSR and the GS wheel as well. Now with this wheel, as you can see here, all these buttons are a little bit further in, which means you ultimately end up having to kind of curl your hand around a little bit and angle your thumb to reach them. Particularly the thumb encoders, they really aren't in a very ergonomically comfortable position, at least for somebody with hands of my size. Now I wear size large gloves, so I don't have very big hands really at all. To reach the thumb encoder, I really do have to rotate my arm around, and likewise with these two buttons here as well. So yeah, just look, I mean, I feel like it's kind of a little bit form over function here would probably be the best way to describe it. Just ergonomically, not the best wheel that I've ever used. But otherwise, I think all the inputs have a relatively good feel to them. I think that they're in line with what I would personally expect from my experience for the price point. So certainly nothing really to complain about there, other than just the shifters and particularly the analog paddles on the back. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of a step up in quality over the GS and FSR wheel for that increase in price. I feel like overall we are paying a bit of a premium for the novelty of the circular rotating dash. Whether or not that's something that you think is justified in the cost is purely up to you, but I do really like the fact that you can fully customize this dash, and I think it's really commendable that they've gone to the effort of integrating this with their own software rather than relying on third-party software. While undoubtedly you can get more functionality than what we see here out of some of those third-party wheels that do rely on SimHub, if something was to ever happen to SimHub, if they stopped allowing third-party wheels to use the software for some reason, then you're kind of screwed there. Whereas with Moza, you know that everything is their own, and there shouldn't really be any major issues there. So obviously it's a big investment for them to go and develop their own software. I can't imagine that this will be the only wheel that we'll see that available for. I don't know whether it's something that we're going to see available for the FSR wheel and their integrated dashes for their wheelbases later on. I will update you in the comments down below if I do get any news on that. But for now, at least, I think they've done a really good job. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see where things go with the customization options on the dash as well. So there are a couple of things that I do think stand out as lacking with this wheel. One of those is the lack of any sort of tuning menu. Now, within the Fanatec ecosystem, by comparison, you do have the option of pressing that tuning menu button, which brings up the option to adjust your force feedback settings or switch between different profiles directly from the steering wheel. Now, Moza, as well as most other manufacturers these days, do have apps that you can use on your phone to make adjustments, so you don't have to Alt-Tab out of your game and across to your drivers. But Given that we have a dash built in here, I was disappointed to see that there wasn't some sort of integration with that, and hopefully that's something that we can see implemented into the future. In fairness, I don't know what that integration is going to be like on the Bentley wheel either. So if you are comparing the two, yeah, I just don't know how that's going to look at this point, because obviously it doesn't have the same type of display that we've seen on any other Fanatec wheels in the past. So obviously reserve any sort of judgment or comparison between the two there, but that was certainly something that stood out to me as a pretty significant missed opportunity and something that disappointed me about the wheel. The other not so major disappointment was that these RGB LED push buttons don't have more functionality. As you saw earlier, you do have the ability to change the colors on these, but they don't have the option of responding visually to a press or any sort of telemetry data inside the game. But overall, I think for what this wheel is, they've done a really good job. I think there's certainly a lot of positives here, but yeah, probably not a wheel that I would personally purchase for my own rig, simply because ergonomically, it just doesn't really particularly suit my driving style. But you might absolutely love it. You might think it's absolutely perfect for the style of driving that you're doing. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you do end up picking one of these up, please do make sure you come back and let us know what your experience is like as well. But yeah, look, overall, I think it's a very good product. I think it's fairly priced for what it is as well. And I'm really excited to see where things go in the future, particularly on the software side of things. I have mentioned in previous Moza review videos recently that I do feel like they're falling a little bit behind with regards to software. And we have had a few little software glitches with the beta software that we've been testing this wheel with. But the fact that they've gone to the effort of developing their own in-house software for all of the functionality on this wheel rather than relying on third party, I think is definitely a big thumbs up, a big selling point for this wheel, and definitely something that I at least think is worthy of praise. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out, guys. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Make sure you sub to the channel as well so you don't miss out on future videos, including the review video of that Bentley GT3 wheel if it ever does eventually release. But as always, guys, if you do want to pick up any of the gear that you've seen in today's video or any other sim racing gear, check the links down in the description below for some handy discounts that'll save you a little bit of money and help us out in the process. We really appreciate your support there. It is what keeps us running. Thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you again in the next one. Bye.